The late afternoon sun hung heavy over Savannah, Georgia, casting a golden haze across Forsyth Park. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the faint hum of cicadas, a symphony of summer that draped the city in a fleeting sense of peace. Families folded picnic blankets, their laughter fading as they drifted toward home. Children abandoned swings, their squeals swallowed by the encroaching dusk. Dogs tugged at leashes, eager to escape the park's cooling shadows. Amid this quiet exodus, one figure remained, a solitary anchor against the tide of departure. Lena Harper, 37, sat on a weathered wooden bench by the park's pond, her navy blazer folded neatly beside her. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, a few strands loosened by the humid breeze. In her lap rested a worn leather notebook, its pages creased from years of relentless use. Her pen moved with deliberate precision, scratching out thoughts about a recent FBI case, a terrorist cell dismantled just days ago. Lena was no stranger to high-stakes operations, but here, in this fleeting moment of stillness, she allowed herself to breathe. Her hazel eyes traced the ripples on the pond, where a pair of mallards drifted lazily, oblivious to the world beyond their watery domain. She was neither restless nor troubled. She was simply present, a rare luxury for a woman who lived her life on the edge of chaos. But peace, for Lena, was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Across the park, a police cruiser rolled to a stop along the main path, its tires crunching gravel like a predator's slow approach. The door groaned open, and Officer Derek Voss, 42, stepped out. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud, his broad shoulders squared as if bracing for a fight. Sunglasses perched on his nose despite the fading light, he moved with the swagger of a man who thrived on control. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes narrow and searching betrayed a hunger for confrontation. He scanned the park, his gaze locking onto Lena almost instantly. To him, she was an anomaly, a black woman, alone, unafraid, and utterly still. That stillness unnerved him, though he'd never admit it. He saw a problem where none existed, and Derek Voss was not the kind of man to let a problem go unchallenged. Lena barely glanced up as he approached, her pen pausing mid-sentence. She sensed the weight of his footsteps, the manufactured authority in every deliberate step. A few teenagers lingered nearby, sprawled on the grass, their phones glowing in the twilight. One of them, a lanky boy with a skateboard tucked under his arm, noticed Voss's approach. Instinctively, he pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. He didn't know when it yet, but something in the air felt wrong, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Ma'am," Voss barked, his voice slicing through the quiet like a blade. "What exactly are you doing here?" The question was sharp, accusatory, too loud for the empty space between them. Lena closed her notebook slowly, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. She slipped it into her bag, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "Sitting," she said, her voice even, unyielding, a calm that carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. Voss's jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He took a step closer, invading her space, his shadow falling across the bench. "We've had complaints," he said, his tone laced with menace. "Suspicious individuals watching kids. Strangers hanging around where they don't belong." The lie was effortless, a script he'd recited too many times to count. Lena raised an eyebrow, her expression a subtle challenge. "And you believe sitting on a park bench qualifies?" she asked, her voice steady, measured, cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. "I asked you a question," Voss snapped, his hand inching toward his belt, fingers brushing the holster. The teenagers nearby shifted, their murmurs growing louder. The boy with the phone started recording, his hands trembling slightly as he aimed the camera at the scene. "ID," Voss demanded, his voice rising, a growl now. "On what grounds?" Lena replied, her tone unwavering, her eyes locked on his. The tension crackled, electric, a live wire sparking in the humid air. The boy's phone began streaming live, the viewer count ticking upward, 2, then 20, then 100. Comments flickered across the screen. "What's happening? Who is she? Why is he in her face?" "You match a description," Voss lied, his words dripping with contempt. Lena moved deliberately, reaching into her bag with a slowness that was neither fear nor defiance but something far more dangerous: control. Her fingers brushed the worn leather of her wallet, but Voss's patience, already paper-thin, snapped. "Step away from the bag," he roared, his voice splitting the air. Lena froze, her hands visible, her voice steady as stone. "I'm retrieving my identification, as you requested." "I said step away," Voss bellowed, his face reddening, his body coiled like a spring. The teenagers gasped, drawing closer, their phones now multiplying the scene across social media. The live stream surged past 400 viewers. Lena stood slowly, her hands raised slightly in passive compliance, her eyes never leaving Voss's. She took a single step back from the bench. It was all the opening he needed. Without warning, Voss lunged forward, his boot slamming into Lena's bag, sending it skidding across the gravel. Paper spilled out, fluttering like wounded birds. Lena flinched instinctively, a reflex she couldn't suppress, and Voss seized on it like a predator smelling blood. He swung his arm, his fist grazing her shoulder, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, her knee scraping the ground, her palm catching gravel as she braced herself. Pain shot through her, sharp and searing, but she bit down on it, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a cry. Gasps erupted from the growing crowd. A woman nearby shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" The boys' live stream exploded, the viewer count climbing to 1,000. Lena stayed down for a heartbeat, her breath steadying, her mind racing. Blood trickled from a cut on her lip where she'd bitten it, but her eyes burned with a fury she held tightly leashed. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, her voice low, trembling not with fear but with a rage so potent it seemed to hum in the air. Voss smirked, pulling cuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for obstruction," he said, his voice smug, certain, the tone of a man who believed he was untouchable. Lena pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, standing tall despite the pain radiating from her shoulder. "For what?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos, her composure a tower he couldn't topple. "For refusing a lawful order," Voss spat, stepping closer, the cuffs glinting in his hand. Another cruiser screeched to a stop nearby, its lights flashing red and blue, painting the park in an eerie glow. Officer Ethan Caldwell, 27, emerged, his face pale, his eyes darting between Voss and Lena. He hesitated, sensing the wrongness of the scene, but Voss's glare silenced any doubt. "Cuff her," Voss barked. Ethan moved forward, his hands shaking as he fastened the cold steel around Lena's wrists. The cuffs bit into her skin too tight, but she didn't flinch. She turned, her movements deliberate, allowing the cuffs to close with a final click. The crowd grew louder, voices rising in protest. "She didn't do anything," a man shouted, his phone capturing every angle. The live stream crossed 2,000 viewers, hashtags forming in real time. "Justice for Lena, Savannah PD." Voss yanked Lena toward his cruiser, his grip bruising her arm. She walked without stumbling, her head high, her eyes forward, a queen in chains. Ethan trailed behind, his face ashen, his hands twitching as if fighting an invisible battle within himself. Through the cruiser's dirty window, Lena caught her reflection, bloodied, bruised but unbroken. The boys' live stream captured one final shot before the door slammed shut. Lena Harper, FBI agent, falsely arrested in the dying light of a Savannah evening while the world watched. Voss had no idea what he'd unleashed. He'd kicked the wrong woman, ignited the wrong spark, and the fire was already spreading. But the park held more secrets than Voss realized. As the cruiser pulled away, a figure lingered in the shadows of the oaks, unnoticed by the crowd. A man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured, watched Lena's arrest with a cold, calculating gaze. His phone buzzed with a message. "She's the one. Move to phase 2. He slipped away into the dusk, leaving behind a park that would never be the same. Lena's battle had begun, but the forces arrayed against her were deeper, darker, and far more dangerous than a single rogue cop. The city of Savannah was about to learn what happens when truth collides with power. The cruiser's engine growled as it cut through Savannah's quiet streets, its red and blue lights slicing through the deepening twilight. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with the scent of old vinyl and something faintly metallic like rust or blood. Lena Harper sat upright in the back seat, her wrists burning where the cuffs bit too tightly into her skin. The pain was sharp, a constant reminder of the violence that had brought her here, but she refused to let it show. Her face was a mask of calm, her hazel eyes fixed on the back of Officer Derek Voss's head, watching every twitch, every shift in his posture. She was a predator in chains, biding her time, cataloging every detail for the reckoning she knew was coming. Voss gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw grinding audibly. He adjusted the rearview mirror, angling it to keep Lena's face in view, as if she were a wild animal he needed to monitor. She met his gaze without flinching, forcing him to either hold her stare or look away. He chose the latter, his eyes flickering to the windshield, his breath quickening. The silence between them was a living thing, heavy with unspoken threats and the weight of what had just happened in Forsyth Park. Outside, the city blurred past oaks draped in Spanish moss, streetlights flickering to life, the world carrying on as if nothing had changed had been shattered. "You think you're special," Voss muttered, his voice low, bitter, curling out of his mouth like smoke. Lena didn't respond. She stared at the back of his head, measuring every syllable, every tense muscle in his shoulders. "You think just because you sit there all calm you're better than everyone else. Like rules don't apply to you." His words were venomous, laced with a resentment that ran deeper than this moment, deeper than her. Lena shifted slightly, the cuffs pressing harder against her wrists, the pain a dull fire under her skin. Fury coiled in her chest, but she suppressed it. Easy was dangerous. Easy could cost her everything. "I followed your orders," she said, her voice clinical, stripped of emotion. Voss barked a laugh, humorless, sharp. "You followed them when you felt like it. You people always want to play by your own rules." The phrase "you people" hung in the air, a confession wrapped in anger. Lena's spine stiffened, but her breathing stayed steady, deliberate. "You don't know anything about me," she said, each word a blade, precise and cutting. Voss grunted, his eyes flicking to the mirror again. "Don't have to. I've seen 1,000 of you before. Think the world owes you something just because you show up." His voice dripped with disdain, but beneath it, Lena caught something else, a crack, a tremor of uncertainty. She filed it away, a weapon for later. The cruiser turned onto a narrower street, the streetlights growing sparser, the houses set back from the road, their windows dark. This wasn't the way to the main precinct. Lena's pulse quickened, but her face remained impassive. She catalogued the route, street names, turns, the number of houses passed. She'd done this before in covert ops in war zones. Tonight she wasn't an agent. She was prey, and Voss was taking her somewhere quiet, somewhere hidden. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. Voss smirked, not turning. "Someplace quiet." The words were a threat, casual but deliberate. Lena shifted against the seat, the cuffs biting deeper, but she refused to show discomfort. Every second mattered now. Every ounce of focus. "You're making a mistake," she said, her tone low, unyielding. "No," Voss replied, his voice almost gleeful. "I'm making an example." The cruiser jolted as it turned onto an uneven side street, gravel crackling under the tires. The houses here were sparse, their porches empty, their yards overgrown. No witnesses. No cameras. No one to see what was about to happen. Lena's mind raced, her training kicking in like muscle memory. She noted the distance between turns, the layout of the street, the absence of streetlights. She wasn't just a victim. She was an asset, someone Voss wanted to disappear. And that was his first mistake. "You're not scared enough," Voss said, his tone almost conversational, but laced with frustration. "Most people by now they're begging." Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. She would not give him the satisfaction. "You're projecting," she said softly, her voice a quiet dagger. He snorted. "Projecting what?" "Your fear," she replied, the words landing like a blow. Voss's jaw ticked, that same involuntary twitch she'd noticed in the park. It was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the small, weak man hiding behind the badge. "You don't know a damn thing about me," he growled, his voice rising, fraying at the edges. "I know enough," Lena said, her voice steady, unyielding. "I know you think this uniform makes you invincible. I know you think the badge is a shield that justifies anything you do. I know you picked the wrong woman tonight." Voss's hands tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking under his grip. For a moment, she thought he might stop, drag her out into the dark, finish what he'd started. But he didn't. He pressed harder on the gas, the cruiser surging forward, the engine roaring like a beast scenting blood. Through the window, Lena glimpsed a broken street sign, Clover Lane, and committed it to memory. Every detail was ammunition. Every second she remained calm was a weapon he couldn't take from her. "You think you're going to turn this around on me?" Voss said, his voice a snarl. "You think anybody's going to believe your story?" Lena leaned forward slightly, the cuffs clinking against the metal divider. "They already do," she said, her voice razor sharp. Voss laughed, but it was forced, brittle, a sound that betrayed his unraveling. The cruiser hit a pothole, the frame rattling hard enough to make Lena's teeth clench. Voss cursed under his breath, his nerves fraying visibly now. Lena sat back, her wrists burning, her shoulder throbbing where his fist had landed. But her mind was a blade, honed and lethal. This wasn't over. Not even close. She could feel the momentum shifting, a current pulling toward reckoning. The cruiser slowed as it approached a squat, concrete building tucked behind a chain-link fence. The sign above the rusted door read Savannah Substation 3, the paint peeling, the letters barely legible under a flickering bulb. No other cars sat in the lot. No lights glowed from the windows. It was a place chosen for secrecy, for silence, not for justice. Voss killed the engine, the sudden quiet deafening. He climbed out without a word, his boots crunching on the cracked asphalt. The door beside Lena popped open, and he grabbed her elbow, yanking her from the seat with bruising force. She stumbled, her injured knee protesting, but caught herself before she could fall. The ground was uneven, pitted with decades of neglect. Lena scanned the surroundings, exit points, sightlines, blind spots. The substation was isolated, deliberately so, a black hole where complaints went to die. Inside, the air was colder, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, casting a sickly pallor over everything. The tiled floor was stained, the walls a dirty off-white, the smell of stale coffee and chemical cleaner clinging to the air. The front desk was unmanned, a half-empty mug abandoned beside a flickering monitor. Voss shoved Lena forward, his hand rough on her shoulder. She didn't resist, her compliance a strategy, not surrender. Officer Ethan Caldwell trailed behind, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously between Lena and Voss. His hand brushed his baton, a nervous tick that betrayed his unease. He'd seen what happened in the park, had watched it unfold like a slow-motion tragedy. Unlike Voss, he still had enough humanity to feel the weight of it. Voss led her down a narrow hallway, past battered lockers and closed doors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. He pushed her into a windowless room, barely larger than a closet. A single steel chair was bolted to the floor, a dented metal table its only companion. No cameras. No microphones. No oversight. Sit, Voss barked. Lena sat, her movements slow, deliberate, her wrists swelling against the cuffs. She made no sound, no sign of pain, her gaze steady, unbreakable. Voss slammed a clipboard onto the table, the sound cracking through the room. Name, he demanded, leaning in, his face inches from hers. Lena remained silent, her eyes locking onto his, a quiet defiance that made his jaw tighten. I said name, he growled, his voice a low threat. She lifted her gaze slowly, unflinching. You had time to read it when you rifled through my things, she said, her voice threaded with cold fury. Voss straightened, pacing like a caged animal, his frustration radiating in waves. His authority, so absolute in the park, was crumbling under her silence. Ethan shifted by the wall, his discomfort palpable. You think you're smart? Voss snapped, his voice low, dangerous. You think being clever's gonna save you? Lena tilted her head, the faintest hint of a smile curling her lips. You think being brutal is going to protect you? She returned. Voss slammed his palm on the table, the sound like a gunshot. Ethan jumped, his hand twitching toward his belt. Lena didn't move, her calm a fortress he couldn't breach. You people think you're untouchable, Voss growled, the phrase slipping out again, raw and unfiltered. Lena's eyes narrowed. You people, she repeated softly, her voice a blade dipped in ice. Voss froze, realizing too late he'd said too much. He glanced at Ethan, who looked away, his face flushed with guilt. You need to remember where you are, Voss said, trying to regain control, his voice strained. I know exactly where I am, Lena replied, her words final, unyielding. Outside, a phone rang unanswered, its shrill tone echoing down the hall. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door slammed. No one came. No one cared. Voss turned to Ethan, his voice sharp. Stay here. Watch her. Ethan blinked, uncertain. Sir, he said, his voice tentative, maybe we should process her at the main. Voss cut him off with a glare. I said watch her. He stormed out, the door swinging shut with a heavy thud, leaving Lena and Ethan alone under the flickering light. For a moment, neither spoke. Lena flexed her hands, testing the strength in her fingers, the cuffs cutting deeper into her swollen wrists. Her shoulder ached, her knee throbbed, but her mind was razor-sharp, cataloging every detail of the room's layout. Ethan's nervous ticks, the faint hum of a generator outside. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you need water or something? Lena raised an eyebrow, her expression cutting. You think a cup of water's going to fix this? He flushed, looking away, his fingers tapping against his belt. You saw what happened, Lena said, her voice low, piercing the stagnant air. You know this isn't right. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It's not my call, he mumbled, the words hollow. That's the lie they tell you. Lena said, not pushing, not pleading, just stating a fact. That you're just following orders. That you're not responsible. Ethan shifted, miserable, his mouth working silently, searching for words that wouldn't come. Outside, a car engine rumbled, the sound faint but distinct through the thin walls. Lena listened, calculating 2 vehicles, maybe 3 people in the building. No help coming. No witnesses if things went wrong. Ethan's voice broke the silence, barely audible. I don't know how to fix this. Lena's gaze softened just for a moment. You start by not pretending you didn't see, she said, her words simple, unyielding. The door rattled and Voss re-entered, his face redder, his frustration a living thing. He glanced between Ethan and Lena, suspicion narrowing his eyes. Everything under control? He barked. Ethan straightened, reflexive. Yes, sir. Lena said nothing, her gaze steady, a storm gathering behind her calm. Voss snatched the clipboard, muttering curses under his breath. He seemed less certain now, his cracks spreading, his untouchable facade crumbling. But Lena knew something Voss didn't. The footage from the park was spreading, a wildfire he couldn't contain. And in the shadows of Savannah's underbelly, the man in the hoodie from the park was watching, waiting, his phone buzzing with new orders. Lena's arrest wasn't just a mistake. It was a move in a larger game, one that reached higher and darker than Voss could imagine. She sat in that cold, windowless room, her wrists bleeding, her body bruised, but her resolve unbroken. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every voice silenced, every life discarded. And she was only getting started. The fluorescent light in the windowless room flickered, casting erratic shadows across the stained tiles of Savannah Substation 3. The air was heavy, laced with the acrid tang of old coffee and the faint hum of a failing bulb. Lena Harper sat motionless in the bolted steel chair, her wrists raw and swollen beneath the too tight cuffs. The pain was a steady pulse, a reminder of the violence that had landed her here, but her face betrayed nothing. Her hazel eyes, sharp and unyielding, traced the cracks in the wall, her mind a steel trap cataloging every detail: the squeak of Derek Voss's boots, the nervous shuffle of Ethan Caldwell's feet, the distant drip of a leaky pipe. She was a caged lion, waiting, watching, her calm a weapon sharper than any blade. Voss paced the confined space, his movements jerky, his earlier swagger eroded by a growing unease. He flipped the clipboard in his hands, the blank form a mockery of procedure he had no intention of following. His eyes darted to Lena, then away, as if her steady gaze burned. Something gnawed at him, a splinter of doubt that had lodged itself the moment he'd shoved her into the cruiser. He muttered under his breath, fragmented phrases about paperwork, about control, but the words lacked conviction. Lena watched him unravel, her silence a mirror reflecting his crumbling authority. Ethan stood by the wall, his young face pale, his hands twitching at his sides. He avoided Lena's eyes, his guilt a tangible weight in the room. He'd seen the park, the unprovoked assault, the cuffs snapping shut on a woman who'd done nothing but sit. His training told him to obey, to follow Voss's lead, but his conscience screamed otherwise. The tension between them, Voss's volatility, Lena's defiance, Ethan's indecision, hung like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Voss stopped pacing, his attention shifting to Lena's belongings, scattered across the table after he'd kicked her bag in the park. The leather wallet lay among the mess, its edges worn, its contents untouched until now. He grabbed it with a grunt, intending to shove it into an evidence bag, to bury this incident under a pile of bureaucratic excuses. The wallet slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a soft thud. A plastic ID sleeve slid free, glinting under the flickering light. Voss bent down, his fingers brushing the edge, and froze. The gold-embossed emblem caught the light first, bold and unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Below it, in stark black print, was her name: Lena Harper, Supervisory Special Agent. For a heartbeat, Voss didn't move. His breath caught, his brain stumbling over the revelation, trying to reconcile the woman he'd cuffed, the woman he'd struck, with the authorities staring back at him. His fingers twitched, nearly dropping the wallet again. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Lena lifted her head slowly, catching his hesitation like a predator scenting blood. Their eyes locked across the small room, and for the first time since the park, it was Voss who looked away. He snatched the wallet, jamming the ID back inside with a roughness that betrayed his panic. His movements were clumsy, his bravado evaporating, leaving behind a man who just stepped onto a minefield. "This doesn't change anything," he muttered, more to himself than to her, his voice cracking at the edges. Lena said nothing. She didn't need to. The badge spoke louder than words, a silent thunder that shook the room. Voss turned his back, running a hand over his buzzed hair, his breathing shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead, glistening under the harsh light. He grabbed the clipboard again, flipping it open with a force that sent papers fluttering. His hands trembled as he fumbled for a pen, scribbling something illegible, then stopping, the pen poised above the page as if he'd forgotten how to write. The light buzzed louder, flickering into brief darkness before sputtering back to life. Shadows danced across Voss's face, highlighting the fear creeping into his features. Lena adjusted her posture, the cuffs clinking faintly, a deliberate sound that made Voss flinch. It was a reminder she wasn't just a civilian anymore. She was someone with power, someone who could end him with a single phone call. He spun toward her, his jaw tight, his eyes wild with a mix of anger and dread. "You think that badge makes you untouchable?" he snapped, his voice breaking, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Lena's gaze didn't waver. "You think yours does?" she replied, her voice low, steady, a blade slipping between his ribs. The words hit harder than any blow, stripping away the illusion he'd clung to. Voss's face darkened, his fists clenching, and for a terrifying moment, Lena thought he might strike her again, try to erase his mistake with violence. But he stepped back, shoving a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. "Nobody knows you're here," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading, as if convincing himself. "Nobody saw anything." Lena tilted her head, studying him like a scientist observing a specimen unraveling. "You're lying to yourself," she said, her tone soft but lethal. "They saw everything." She didn't need to elaborate. The footage from the park was out there, spreading like wildfire, multiplying across screens, unstoppable. Voss's eyes flickered with panic, the realization sinking in that his actions were no longer his to control. He pulled out his radio, his thumb hovering over the call button, but he hesitated. Contacting dispatch would mean admitting what he'd done, putting his name beside hers in black and white, a death sentence for his career, his pension, his carefully crafted identity. He shoved the radio back onto his belt with a grunt, his frustration boiling over. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted, banging his fist on the table, the clipboard jumping under the force. Lena's eyes didn't flinch. "No," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "I know I am." The words landed like a slap, raw and unyielding. Voss's face contorted, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. He took a step toward her, his hand twitching toward his baton, but the door rattled before he could act. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "Sir, maybe we should." Voss rounded on him, his eyes blazing. "Shut up, Caldwell," he roared, his voice echoing off the walls. Ethan shrank back, his hands raised in surrender, but his eyes darted to Lena, a silent apology flickering in them. Voss stormed toward the door, yanking it open so hard it slammed against the wall. "Stay here," he barked at Ethan, his voice a jagged edge. "Don't let her move." He disappeared down the hall, his footsteps fading into the distance, leaving a void of tension in his wake. Ethan closed the door, his movements slow, reluctant. He leaned against the wall, his face pale, his fingers tapping nervously against his belt. Lena watched him, her mind working, assessing. He was the weak link, the one who could be swayed, but she needed to tread carefully. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice soft but firm, cutting through the silence. Ethan's eyes flicked to her, then away, his jaw tightening. "I don't have a choice," he muttered, the words hollow, unconvincing. "There's always a choice," Lena said, her tone measured, not pleading but stating a truth. "You saw what he did. You know it's wrong." Ethan swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena leaned forward slightly, the cuffs clinking, her gaze piercing. "It's as simple as you make it," she said. "You can stand by and let this happen, or you can do something about it. But don't fool yourself into thinking you're not choosing." Ethan's face crumpled, his resolve wavering. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of footsteps in the hall cut him off. The door swung open and Voss re-entered, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He carried a manila folder now, its edges creased, as if he'd been gripping it too tightly. He slapped it onto the table, glaring at Lena. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You think you can play me?" Lena didn't respond, her silence a wall he couldn't breach. Voss leaned in, his breath hot and sour. "This ends here," he said, his words a promise, a threat. But Lena knew better. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The folder on the table caught her eye, its contents partially visibly a photocopied report, A name she recognized from an old FBI case, a thread connecting Voss to something bigger, darker. Her arrest wasn't random. It was deliberate, a move in a game she hadn't yet fully uncovered. Outside, the world was waking up, the park footage spreading, voices rising. And in the shadows, the man in the hoodie was moving, his phone buzzing with new instructions, his eyes fixed on a plan that would test Lena's resolve like never before. Lena sat back, her wrists bleeding, her body bruised, but her spirit unbroken. Voss had seen her badge, had felt the weight of her authority, but he didn't understand the true cost of his actions. He thought he could bury her here in this forgotten room, in this forgotten station. He was wrong. Lena Harper wasn't just an agent. She was a force, a reckoning, and the storm she was about to unleash would shake Savannah to its core. The air in the cramped holding room of Savannah Substation 3 was thick with tension, the flickering fluorescent light casting jagged shadows across the stained walls. Lena Harper sat rigid in the bolted steel chair, her wrists chafed and bleeding beneath the cuffs, her shoulder throbbing from Derek Voss's earlier assault. Her hazel eyes, sharp and unyielding, tracked every movement in the room, her mind a fortress of calculation. Officer Derek Voss stood over the dented metal table, his face flushed with a volatile mix of rage and panic, the manila folder in his hands trembling slightly. He'd seen her FBI badge, felt the ground shift beneath him, but his desperation clung to him like a second skin, driving him to double down rather than retreat. Officer Ethan Caldwell lingered by the wall, his young face pale, his hands twitching with indecision, caught between loyalty to Voss and the gnawing guilt of what he'd witnessed. The silence was a live wire, crackling with the weight of what was coming. Voss slammed the folder onto the table, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. "You think you're walking out of here?" he snarled, leaning in close, his breath hot and sour. "Badge or no badge, you're nothing in this room." Lena's gaze didn't waver, her voice steady as stone. "You're wrong," she said, each word a deliberate cut. "You're the one who's nothing." Voss's eyes widened, his fist clenching, but before he could respond, a sharp rap at the door shattered the moment. The door swung open and Captain Rachel Torres strode in, her presence a sudden, commanding force that sucked the air from the room. At 50, she was compact and sharp-eyed, her dark hair streaked with silver, her uniform impeccable. She carried the weight of authority like a blade, honed by years of navigating a system riddled with corruption. In her hand was a folded document, its edges crisp, the preliminary suspension order she'd signed the moment the park footage hit her desk. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Lena's cuffed wrists, the bruises blooming on her skin, then shifting to Voss, whose bravado faltered under her scrutiny. "Stand down, Officer Voss," Torres said, her voice cold, slicing through the tension like a guillotine. Voss stiffened, his jaw working furiously. "Captain, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice low, desperate. She resisted. Torres didn't let him finish. "I said stand down," she repeated, her tone unyielding, her eyes narrowing to pinpoints. The room seemed to shrink under her command, the walls themselves bending to her will. Outside, the faint hum of voices grew louder, a murmur that had begun to swell into a roar. The park footage had spread, a wildfire leaping from phone to phone, and now a crowd was gathering at the substation's gates, protesters, reporters, citizens drawn by the raw injustice captured on video. Their chants filtered through the thin walls. "Justice for Lena. No more badges without honor." The sound was a distant thunder, a warning Voss couldn't ignore, but his panic made him reckless. He took a step toward Torres, his hand twitching toward his holster. "You don't understand, Captain," he said, his voice rising, cracking. "She's a threat." Torres's hand shot up, silencing him. "You've done enough," she said, her words a whip. "Step back, or I'll have you in cuffs before you can blink." Voss's face contorted, his eyes wild, and for a moment it seemed he might snap. His hand closed around the grip of his sidearm, the metal glinting under the flickering light. Lena's pulse quickened, but her expression remained a mask of calm. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos. "Don't do this, Voss," she said, her words directed at him but meant for Ethan, who stood frozen, his eyes darting between the gun and Torres. "You're digging your own grave." Voss's head snapped toward her, his face a mask of fury, but it was Ethan who moved first. "Sir, stop!" Ethan shouted, his voice breaking as he lunged forward, grabbing Voss's arm. The room erupted into chaos. Voss roared, twisting free, his gun half-drawn, but Ethan was faster, younger, driven by a surge of guilt-fueled courage. He shoved Voss against the wall, pinning his wrist, the gun clattering to the floor. Torres moved with lightning precision, kicking the weapon out of reach, her own hand resting on her holster, ready to draw if needed. Enough, she bellowed, her voice a thunderclap that froze everyone in place. Voss struggled, his face red, his breath ragged, but Ethan held firm, his grip unyielding. Let go, Caldwell. Voss spat, but Ethan shook his head, his voice trembling but resolute. No, sir. This is over. Lena watched, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Ethan's choice was a crack in the system, a small but seismic shift. She caught his eye, giving him a nod so slight it was almost imperceptible, a silent acknowledgement of his courage. Torres stepped between Voss and Lena, her back to the table, her focus locked on Voss. You're done, she said, her voice low, final. She unfolded the suspension order, holding it up for him to see. Effective immediately. You're suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Badge weapon now. Voss's eyes widened, his breath hitching, but the fight drained from him as the reality sank in. The crowd outside was growing, their chants now a deafening roar, punctuated by the wail of approaching sirens. Every move he made was being watched, recorded, dissected. Slowly, reluctantly, Voss unclipped his badge, his hands shaking as he placed it on the table. His holster followed, the leather creaking as he set it down, a surrender that felt like a death. Torres didn't soften. She motioned to two uniformed officers who'd appeared in the doorway, their faces grim. Escort him out, she ordered. The officers stepped forward, flanking Voss, who tensed as if considering resistance. But the weight of the moment, the cameras, the crowd, the badge in Lena's wallet crushed any defiance. He allowed himself to be led away, his head bowed, his authority stripped bare. Torres turned to Lena, her expression softening for the first time. She studied the swollen wrists, the bruises, the unyielding fire in Lena's eyes. Remove her cuffs, she ordered, her voice firm but not unkind. Ethan hesitated, his hands still trembling from the confrontation, then stepped forward. His fingers fumbled with the key, the cuffs clicking open with a heavy finality. Lena rubbed her wrists, the skin red and raw, but her posture remained unbowed, her dignity intact. I'm sorry, Torres said, the words simple but weighted with sincerity. This should never have happened. Lena nodded once, her gaze steady. It happens every day, she said, her voice quiet but piercing. Just not to people with badges. Torres's jaw tightened, a flicker of shame crossing her face, but she didn't look away. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Let's get you out of here. Lena rose, her movements deliberate, every step a reclaiming of her power. The hallway buzzed with activity, now officers whispering, administrative staff retreating into corners, the weight of the unfolding scandal pressing down on everyone. Ethan trailed behind, his face conflicted, his earlier courage now tempered by fear of what came next. Outside, the substation's entrance was a blaze of light, floodlights from news vans cutting through the night, turning the cracked asphalt into a stage. The crowd had swelled to hundreds, their signs bobbing in the air. Justice for Lena. Protect, don't attack. Reporters shouted questions, their microphones thrusting forward like spears. Protesters chanted her name, the rhythm rising and falling like a heartbeat. As Voss emerged, flanked by the officers, the crowd erupted, boos and accusations hurling through the air. He tried to keep his chin up, but the weight of exposure dragged him down, his shoulders slumping with each step. Torres stepped out next, her face impassive, ignoring the cameras. Her job wasn't to manage the narrative, it was to begin repairing what was broken. Lena followed, pausing in the doorway, the light washing over her bruised but unyielding form. The crowd fell silent, a hush sweeping through them like a tide pulling back. Phones lifted, live streams capturing the moment, thousands watching from beyond Savannah's borders. She stood there, absorbing the silence, the anticipation, the weight of a city's eyes. A reporter broke the quiet, her voice sharp. Agent Harper, will you press charges? Another shouted. Was this racially motivated? Lena stepped forward, her voice clear, unamplified, yet carrying through the chaos. I didn't choose this fight, she said, her words cutting through the night. But I won't walk away from it. What happened to me happens to people without badges, without cameras, without voices. I stand for them. The crowd murmured, shifting closer, her words sinking into their bones. She turned, moving through the parted crowd, reporters shouting after her. Torres fell into step beside her, silent but resolute. As Lena reached her unmarked FBI car, she caught her reflection in the window, not the bruises, but the fire in her eyes, the purpose that burned brighter than ever. She slid into the driver's seat, the door closing with a soft thud, shutting out the noise. For a moment, the silence was overwhelming. Then her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You're not safe. Back off." Lena's jaw tightened, her fingers tightening on the wheel. This wasn't just about Voss. It was about a network, a system, and they were watching her every move. She started the engine, pulling away from the curb, the flashing lights fading behind her. The man in the hoodie from the park lingered at the edge of the crowd, his phone glowing with a new message. "She's out. Escalate." Lena had won this battle, but the war was just beginning and the shadows were closing in. The night outside Savannah Substation 3 was alive with chaos, a pulsing, electric storm of voices and lights. Floodlights from news vans bathed the cracked facade of the building in a harsh glow, turning it into a stage for a city on the brink. Hundreds of protesters lined the sidewalks, their signs "Justice for Lena. No more brutality," bobbing like buoys in a turbulent sea. Reporters jostled for position, their microphones thrusting forward, their questions overlapping into a relentless cacophony. The air was thick with humidity and outrage, the chants of the crowd rising and falling like a heartbeat. "Lena! Lena!" Inside her unmarked FBI car, Lena Harper sat still, her bruised hands resting on the steering wheel, her hazel eyes fixed on the reflection in the windshield. The woman staring back was bloodied, battered, but unbroken, a survivor forged in fire. Lena exhaled slowly, grounding herself. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, heavy but not crushing. She'd known this was coming since Derek Voss's boot slammed into her shoulder, since the cuffs bit into her wrists. She'd prepared for it in the suffocating silence of that windowless room, her mind sharpening even as her body ached. But nothing could truly prepare her for this. Standing before a city, a nation, millions watching through screens, waiting to dissect her every word, her every breath. They wanted a victim, a hero, a villain, anything but the truth. Lena would give them the truth, raw and unfiltered, whether they were ready or not. She opened the car door, stepping into the glare. The crowd's roar swelled, a tidal wave of sound that crashed over her. Cameras flashed, their lenses glinting like predatory eyes. Captain Rachel Torres stood nearby, arms folded, flanked by officers who avoided Lena's gaze, their faces a mix of shame and defiance. Voss was gone, whisked away to some administrative purgatory, but his absence only amplified the stakes. The system he represented was still here, watching, waiting for her to falter. Lena wouldn't give it the satisfaction. The protesters parted as she approached the makeshift podium, a cluster of microphones taped together, wires snaking across the asphalt. Reporters shouted, their voices a chaotic barrage. "Agent Harper, are you filing charges? Was this racially motivated? Is Savannah PD under federal review?" The names of network CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates were barked like challenges, each vying for the soundbite that would define the night. Lena let the noise wash over her, her expression neutral, her posture steady. She studied the faces in the crowd, some curious, some skeptical, many burning with a fury that mirrored her own. Signs caught her eye: badge without honor is violence. Protect, don't attack. A young girl, no older than 10, held one that read, "We see you, Lena." Lena's throat tightened, but she pushed the emotion down. This wasn't about her. It was about them. She raised a hand and the clamor broke, falling into a sudden total silence. The weight of their attention was a physical thing, pressing against her bruised ribs, but she stood taller for it. "I am Special Agent Lena Harper," she began, her voice clear, unamplified, yet carrying through the humid air like a blade. "And today in this city, I was assaulted by a man who believed his badge gave him permission to break the law he swore to uphold." Cameras clicked frantically, reporters scribbled notes they'd never need, every word already immortalized. "I've served my country for 15 years, she continued, her tone unwavering. "I've dismantled cartels, stopped terrorists, protected lives across every divide. But today, none of that mattered. Not my service, not my record, not my humanity." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective conscience stirring. Lena paused, letting the truth sink deep. "Today I was a threat because of the color of my skin, because I dared to sit on a public bench." A protester shouted, "We see you, Lena." The crowd surged forward, their agreement a roar, no longer passive. Lena waited, her gaze sweeping the faces before her, each one a story, a life, a wound. "This isn't about one officer," she said, her voice hardening. "It's about a system that told him he'd never be held accountable. It's about every ignored complaint, every dismissed cry, Every silent nod that said he could do this to me, to you, to anyone. The silence that followed was heavy, forcing the crowd to confront the reflection she held up. "I'm fortunate," Lena said, her voice softening but no less fierce. "I have a badge. I have a voice. But what about those who don't? What about the ones silenced before they're heard?" No one shouted now. No questions pierced the air. There was only the raw collective weight of a city forced to face itself. "I stand here not for myself," she concluded, her voice a vow, "but for every person made small by fear, every voice muted by injustice, every life treated as less. This ends now." She lowered her hand, signaling the end. The crowd erupted, feet stomping, voices rising in a chant. "No more. No more." Reporters lunged forward, desperate to prolong the moment. "Agent Harper, will you sue? Are you calling for a federal investigation?" Lena ignored them, turning her back on the chaos. Torres fell into step beside her, silent, her presence a shield. Protesters chanted her name, their rhythm a pulse that echoed through the city. Lena reached her car, her reflection in the window sharper now, her purpose a flame that no floodlight could drown. She slid inside, the door closing with a soft thud, muffling the noise. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. The message was brief, chilling. "You talk too much. You'll pay." Lena's jaw tightened, her fingers hovering over the screen. She forwarded the message to her FBI contact, her mind already racing. This wasn't just about Voss. Her words had struck a nerve, and someone with power was watching. Later that night, in the dim glow of her apartment, Lena sat at her kitchen table, the bruises on her wrists darkening, her notebook opened before her. The TV played in the background, muted, looping footage of her speech, the crowd, the signs. She ignored it, her pen scratching out notes, names, connections, fragments of a case she'd been working before the park. Voss's name appeared in her files, a fleeting reference to a local smuggling ring the FBI had been tracking. His aggression, his choice to target her, wasn't random. It was a warning, a move to silence her before she could dig deeper. A soft knock at the door snapped her attention. She rose, her hand instinctively reaching for the service weapon she wasn't carrying. Peering through the peephole, she saw a young woman, nervous, clutching a manila envelope. Lena opened the door a crack, her voice low. "Who are you?" The woman glanced over her shoulder, her voice trembling. "My name's Clara. I work at the precinct. I saw what happened. I have something you need." She thrust the envelope forward, her hands shaking. "They're watching you. Be careful." Lena took the envelope, her eyes narrowing. "Who's they?" Clara shook her head, already backing away. "I can't. Just read it." She vanished into the night, leaving Lena with the weight of new evidence. Inside the envelope were documents, internal memos, disciplinary records, names linked to Voss, and a network of officers tied to the smuggling ring. One name stood out, Captain Harold Gaines, a high-ranking official with a reputation for burying complaints. Lena's pulse quickened. This was bigger than she'd thought, a web of corruption that reached into the heart of Savannah's power structure. She sat back down, the documents spread before her, her mind piecing together the puzzle. The threat on her phone, the man in the hoodie from the park, the envelope, they were all connected. Someone wanted her silenced, not just for what happened today, but for what she might uncover. She picked up her phone, dialing her FBI supervisor, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to talk. Now." Outside, the city burned with protests, the chants growing louder, the fires of change licking at the edges of Savannah's old guard. But in the shadows, the man in the hoodie moved again, his phone buzzing with a new message. "She's digging. Stop her." Lena's speech had lit a spark, but it had also painted a target on her back. The retribution plot was in motion, and the forces aligned against her were closing in, their reach deeper and darker than she could yet imagine. The night pressed against Savannah like a bruise, the city's pulse quickened by the protests still simmering in its streets. Lena Harper sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the manila envelope from Clara spread across her kitchen table, its contents a map of corruption that stretched far beyond Derek Voss. Her bruised wrists ached, the cuts from the cuffs scabbing over, but her mind was a blade, slicing through the documents, memos, names, connections to a smuggling ring she'd been tracking for months. The TV flickered in the corner, muted, showing looping footage of her speech outside Substation 3, the crowd signs a blur of defiance. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence, the screen glowing with an unknown number. Lena answered, her voice low, alert. "Agent Harper." A woman's voice trembled on the other end, barely above a whisper. Please, I need help. My name's Sofia Torres. They have my son Javier. He's 14. They arrested him tonight. They said he resisted, but he didn't. He didn't. The words spilled out, choked with panic. Lena's spine straightened, her fatigue evaporating. Where? She asked, already reaching for her jacket. 5th Precinct, Riverside, Sofia sobbed. Please, someone gave me your name. Said you'd understand. Lena's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. I'm on my way, she said, ending the call before Sofia could respond. She grabbed her keys, badge, and service weapon, the documents left scattered on the table. This wasn't just a plea for help, it was a call to war. The drive to the 5th Precinct was a blur, Savannah Street streaked with neon and shadow. Lena's unmarked FBI car cut through the humid night, her hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The precinct loomed on the edge of an industrial zone, a fortress of concrete and steel, its fluorescent lights harsh against the darkness. As she pulled into the nearly empty lot, a handful of officers lounging near the entrance snapped to attention, their eyes narrowing at the sight of her government plates. Lena stepped out, her badge clipped to her belt, her navy blazer masking the bruises beneath. Her presence was a challenge, her posture unyielding, a storm cloaked in calm. Inside, the precinct buzzed with low-grade tension, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant. The desk sergeant, a burly man with a graying mustache, barely glanced up from his computer. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked, his voice bored, dismissive. Lena's eyes locked onto his, her tone cutting. I'm here for Javier Torres. 14 years old. Brought in tonight. The sergeant squinted at her badge, his expression shifting as he registered her authority. I'll need to check, he began, but Lena cut him off. No. You'll take me to him. Now. Her words were steel, leaving no room for argument. The sergeant fumbled with the logbook, muttering about procedure, but her glare silenced him. He picked up the phone, buzzing open the door to the holding cells, his hands trembling slightly. The hallway beyond was sterile, narrow, the overhead lights buzzing like angry wasps. The officer leading her, a young rookie with nervous eyes, walked too slowly, as if buying time. Lena's boots echoed sharply against the tile, her senses heightened, every sound a potential threat. She spotted Javier immediately in the cell block, curled on a metal bench, his knees pulled to his chest. His face was pale, a fresh bruise blooming on his cheek, a thin cut tracing his jaw. His clothes were rumpled, his sneakers scuffed, his brown eyes wide with fear as he looked up. You're the lady from the news, he whispered, his voice cracking, a mix of awe and desperation. Lena nodded, her expression softening for a moment. I'm getting you out of here, she said, her tone a promise. The rookie shifted awkwardly, his hand resting on his baton. We have procedures, he said, his voice uncertain. Lena's eyes snapped to him, her voice ice. You have procedures when you locked a child in a cell without notifying his guardian. You have procedures when you failed to provide counsel. The rookie opened his mouth to argue, but Lena pulled out her phone, her fingers poised over the screen. I can have the Department of Justice on this line in 30 seconds. Want to explain why you're unlawfully detaining a minor? Panic flickered across his face. He fumbled with the keys, unlocking the cell with shaking hands. Javier stood, his legs wobbly from hours of confinement. Lena caught his arm gently, steadying him, her touch firm but kind. You're okay, she said under her breath. You're safe now. They moved back through the precinct, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Officers watched from behind desks, their faces a mix of guilt and defiance. In the lobby, Sofia Torres paced frantically, her hands wringing the strap of her purse, her face etched with worry. The moment she saw Javier, she ran to him, pulling him into a fierce embrace, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. Javier clung to her, his small frame shaking, burying his face in her jacket. Lena approached the desk, her voice sharp. Release paperwork. Now. The sergeant handed it over without protest, his hands unsteady. Lena skimmed the document, spotting the fabricated charge resisting arrest, and crossed it out with a firm stroke of her pen. This is expunged immediately, she said, her tone brooking no argument. The sergeant nodded mutely, his eyes avoiding hers. Lena turned to Sofia, handing her a copy of the papers. Keep these safe. If anyone contacts you about this, call me directly. Sofia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded fiercely, clutching the documents like a lifeline. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you. Javier looked up at Lena, his voice small but steady. I didn't do anything. I was just walking home, listening to music. I didn't hear them at first, and then Lena placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. You don't have to explain, she said gently. Not to me. You did nothing wrong. Never let them make you believe otherwise. Javier nodded, his face crumpling, the weight of the night threatening to spill over. Sofia guided him toward the exit, casting one last grateful look at Lena. Lena followed them into the cool night air, the city sprawling around them, indifferent and vast. She escorted Sofia and Javier to their car, her eyes scanning the lot for threats, her instincts on high alert. As Sofia buckled Javier in, Lena's phone buzzed a new message from the unknown number. You're making enemies. Watch your back. Her jaw tightened, but before she could respond, headlights flared in her peripheral vision. A black SUV peeled out of the shadows, its engine roaring as it barreled toward her. Lena reacted instantly, shoving Sofia and Javier behind their car. Get down, she shouted, drawing her weapon, her body coiled for action. The SUV swerved, its tires screeching as it tried to force her into the open. Lena dove behind a parked cruiser, her heart pounding, her training taking over. She aimed her Glock, tracking the vehicle, but it didn't slow, its tinted windows hiding the driver. The SUV clipped a streetlight, sparks flying, before accelerating out of the lot and vanishing into the night. Lena lowered her weapon, her breath steadying, her eyes scanning for secondary threats. Sofia peeked out, her face pale. Are you okay? She whispered. Lena nodded, holstering her gun. Stay with Javier. Get home safe. Sofia hesitated, then obeyed, pulling out of the lot, her taillights fading into the distance. Lena stood alone, the precinct's lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. The attack wasn't random. It was a message tied to the documents, the smuggling ring, the names in Clara's envelope. She climbed into her car, her mind racing. The SUV's license plate partially visible in the streetlights tuck in her memory. SVN 392. She jotted it down, her pen scratching furiously. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her FBI supervisor, Marcus Reed. Lena, we got your message about the threat, he said, his voice tense. And we've got Chattersimones moving against you. Stay sharp. Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. Too late, she said. They already tried. She hung up, starting the engine, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The precinct loomed behind her, a fortress of secrets, its walls hiding the same corruption that had targeted Javier, that had targeted her. Saving Javier was a victory, but it was a spark in a powder keg. The documents on her table, the SUV, the names Gaines, Voss, the hooded man from the park were pieces of a larger machine, one that would kill to protect itself. Lena gripped the wheel, the city's lights blurring past. She'd pulled Javier from the jaws of injustice, but the beast was still out there, and it was coming for her next. The rain fell in a steady drizzle, cloaking Savannah in a gray veil that blurred the city's edges. Lena Harper's apartment was a fortress of shadows, lit only by a single desk lamp that cast a pool of light over the chaos on her kitchen table. Documents from Clara's envelope mingled with her own notes, a mosaic of corruption that stretched from Derek Voss to the upper echelons of the Savannah PD. Her bruised wrists ached, the scabs from the cuffs cracking with every movement, but her mind was relentless, piecing together names, dates, and cryptic memos that hinted at a smuggling ring she'd been tracking for months. The TV flickered in the background, muted, showing protesters outside City Hall, their signs a defiant blur, no justice, no peace. Lena's phone sat face down, its silence a temporary reprieve from the threats that had followed her since the precinct. A soft knock at the door snapped her focus. Her hand moved instinctively to her service weapon, holstered at her hip, though she was off duty. She rose, crossing the room with silent steps, peering through the peephole. Officer Ethan Caldwell stood outside, his jacket soaked, his face pale and drawn. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting a shadow to materialize from the rain. Lena unlocked the door, opening it just enough to block his view inside. "You're either brave or stupid," she said, her voice flat, her eyes narrowing. Ethan shifted, shivering, water dripping onto the hardwood. "I have something you need to see," he said, his voice low, urgent. He pulled a thin manila folder from inside his jacket, its edges damp, and handed it to her without a word. Lena took it, her gaze flicking to his face, searching for a trap. "Why now?" she asked, her tone sharp. Ethan wiped his wet hands on his jeans, his voice barely steady. Because after what happened to you, to that kid Javier, I can't pretend anymore. Lena studied him, seeing the cracks in his facade, the guilt, the fear, the flicker of resolve. She stepped aside, letting him in, the door locking with a soft click behind him. Ethan stood awkwardly in the small living room, dripping water, his eyes darting to the documents on the table. Lena opened the folder, her fingers careful, deliberate. Inside were photocopies of disciplinary records, internal complaints that had never reached formal review, witness statements buried under vague administrative notes, officer testimony inconsistent. No further action. Her eyes skimmed the pages, recognizing names Voss, others she'd flagged, incidents that matched the citizen complaints she'd been poring over. Where did you get these? She asked, her voice even, masking the storm brewing inside. Locker room talk, Ethan said, his voice tight. Stuff that got passed around but never filed. I made copies, kept them. Thought I might need them someday. Lena's gaze hardened. Why bring them to me? Ethan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Because you're the only one who'll do something about it. His words hung in the air. A confession and a plea. Lena closed the folder, holding it tightly, her mind racing. You're risking everything, she said. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. It's not worth keeping if it's built on lies. Lena nodded. A silent acknowledgement. There's more, Ethan said, his voice dropping lower. Physical records, old complaints, stuff kept off the system. They're in the archives room, back hallway of the main precinct. Nobody goes there unless they're burying something. Lena's pulse quickened, the pieces falling into place. A secret archive, hidden in plain sight, could be the key to dismantling the rot she'd uncovered. They're cleaning house, Ethan added, his voice urgent. Word spreading. You don't have much time. Lena's eyes narrowed. You've done the right thing, she said quietly. Ethan laughed, the sound hollow. Feels too late for that. Better late than never, Lena replied, her tone firm. Ethan pulled his hood up, slipping back into the rain, his silhouette swallowed by the wet pavement. Lena locked the door, the folder clutched in her hand, a new weapon in her arsenal. She returned to the table, laying it beside Clara's documents, the weight of the truth growing heavier with each page. The archives room was her next move, but it was a fortress within a fortress, guarded by bureaucracy and suspicion. Lena knew she couldn't walk in alone, not without raising alarms. She needed Ethan inside, but his courage was fragile, a flame that could flicker out under pressure. Her phone buzzed, a secure line from her FBI supervisor, Marcus Reed. Lena, we ran the plate from the SUV, he said, his voice tense. Registered to a shell company tied to the smuggling ring. You're stirring a hornet's nest. Lena's jaw tightened. Good, she said. Let them come. She hung up, her plan crystallizing. That night, under the cover of rain, Lena met Ethan at a deserted diner on the city's outskirts, the neon sign flickering in the downpour. The air smelled of grease and burnt coffee, the booths empty save for a lone trucker nursing a mug. Ethan slid into the seat across from her, his face drawn, his eyes haunted. You sure about this? He asked, his voice barely audible over the rain's drumbeat. Lena leaned forward, her voice low, steady. You want to fix this? You're with me. No half measures. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening though fear lingered in his eyes. They devised a plan. Ethan would get her into the precinct after hours, using his access to bypass security. The archives room was locked, but Lena's lock-picking skills honed in covert ops would handle that. The risk was high, cameras, patrols, the chance of being caught, but the reward was a trove of evidence that could topple the system. They left the diner separately, Lena's car slipping through the rain-slicked streets, her mind focused, her heart steady. The main precinct was a monolith at midnight, its lights dim, its halls quiet but not empty. Ethan met her at a side entrance, his uniform damp, his hands shaking as he swiped his keycard. The door clicked open and they moved inside, their footsteps muffled on the tile. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of secrets. Ethan led her through back corridors, avoiding the main patrol routes, his breath shallow, his eyes darting to every shadow. Lena followed, her senses on high alert, her Glock holstered but ready. The archives room was tucked in the oldest wing, a heavy steel door at the end of a narrow hallway lined with peeling paint. Ethan punched in a code, the lock groaning as it released. Inside, the air was thick with dust, rows of metal filing cabinets stretching into the dimness, lit only by a flickering overhead bulb. Lena pulled on gloves, her movements precise, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. She traced the drawer labels, closed cases, internal reviews, complaints, and found one marked restricted. It was locked, but her picks made quick work of the primitive mechanism. The drawer creaked open, revealing manila envelopes, thick and heavy. Lena pulled one out, her flashlight illuminating photographs grainy but damning. Officers, some active, some retired, caught in violent arrests, questionable stops, incidents buried before they could see daylight. Memos from internal affairs, stamped confidential, offered justifications so thin they were insulting. Another envelope held a list, names, dates, precincts, a sprawling map of corruption. Officers shuffled between departments after complaints, never fired. Supervisors who quashed reports. Names Lena recognized Captain Harold Gaines among them, his signature on a memo dismissing a brutality case. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady, photographing each document with her secure FBI device. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a few bad actors. It was a system deliberate and self-sustaining, designed to protect its own at any cost. She reached a folder marked internal memorandums, its contents a blueprint for silence code words, red flags to sideline whistleblowers, promotions for those who stayed quiet. Gaines's name appeared again, a kingpin in a network that stretched beyond Savannah. A noisy soft shuffle in the hallway snapped her focus. She froze, her flashlight clicking off, the room plunging into darkness. Ethan's voice hissed from the door. "Someone's coming." Lena slid the folder back, her body low, moving silently to the corner. The door rattled, a key scraping in the lock. A security guard stepped in, his flashlight sweeping the room, his radio crackling with static. Lena held her breath, her hand on her Glock, but she didn't draw. The guard's beam missed her by inches, lingering on the open drawer. He muttered a curse, stepping closer. Ethan acted first, stepping into the light, his voice shaky but convincing. "Just checking inventory, Mike. Forgot to log it." The guard hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "You're not supposed to be here, Caldwell." Ethan forced a laugh. "Tell me about it." "Captain's orders." The guard grunted, unconvinced, but turned back, his radio buzzing with a new call. The door closed and Lena exhaled, her pulse racing. "We need to move," she whispered, grabbing the photographed documents. They slipped out, but the hallway wasn't empty. A second guard rounded the corner, his eyes locking onto Lena. "Hey," he shouted, reaching for his radio. Lena reacted, sprinting past Ethan, her shoulders slamming into a fire exit. The alarm blared, a deafening wail, but it masked their escape. They ran into the rain, Lena's car parked a block away. The guards' shouts faded behind them, but headlights flared in the Distancia black SUV, the same model from the precinct attack. Lena shoved Ethan into her car, peeling out as the SUV gave chase. The rain-slicked streets were a maze, Lena's driving precise, her training kicking in. She weaved through traffic, the SUV's headlights glaring in her rearview. A sharp turn sent them skidding, but she regained control, losing the pursuer in a narrow alley. Ethan gasped, his face ashen. "Who the hell was that?" Lena's jaw tightened, her eyes fixed on the road. "The people who want this buried." She dropped Ethan at a safe spot, his face haunted but resolute. "Stay low," she said. "This isn't over." Back in her apartment, Lena uploaded the photos to a secure FBI server, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. The documents were dynamite, enough to spark a federal investigation, but the SUV, the guards, the threats they meant the enemy was moving faster than she'd anticipated. The man in the hoodie, Gaines, the smuggling ring, they were all linked, and Lena was their target. She sat back, the rain drumming against the window, her notebook open to a new page. She wrote one line, "The truth is our weapon." They can't hide forever. The city outside burned with protests, but in the shadows, a war was brewing and Lena was ready to fight. The federal courthouse in Savannah stood like a monolith against the morning sky, its stone facade cold and unyielding under a veil of gathering clouds. A restless crowd swelled outside, a sea of protesters, reporters, and onlookers drawn by the gravity of the moment. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes tilted skyward, while journalists huddled under umbrellas, narrating the unfolding drama to a nation hanging on every word. Inside, the courtroom was a cavern of dark oak and muted light, packed wall-to-wall with spectators, activists, off-duty officers, citizens, and strangers united by the weight of what was about to happen. The air buzzed with anticipation, a taut wire ready to snap. At the defense table, Officer Derek Voss sat flanked by his attorneys, his once cocky demeanor replaced by a hollow shell. His gray suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands, the pallor of his face under the courtroom's harsh lights. His eyes darted to the exits as if seeking an escape that didn't exist. Across the aisle, Lena Harper sat with her legal team, her navy dress suit crisp, her posture unbowed despite the bruises still fading on her wrists. Her FBI badge rested in her bag, unnecessary now the world knew who she was. The footage from Forsyth Park, her speech outside Substation 3, the protests that followed had made her a symbol, a lightning rod for a city's reckoning. Judge Evelyn Carter, a stern woman with steel gray hair and decades on the bench, entered with a rustle of robes. The bailiff called for order, chairs scraping as the room rose, then settled into a hushed silence. The trial of Derek Voss, charged with assault, false arrest, and civil rights violations began with a swiftness that matched the public's hunger for justice. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Anita Patel, wasted no time. Exhibits were introduced. Body cam footage, civilian videos from the park, witness statements from those who'd watched Voss's unprovoked attack. Each piece was a brick in an unassailable wall of evidence. The courtroom's massive screen flickered to life, displaying the park footage. The jury watched in silence as Lena sat quietly on the bench, her notebook in hand, a picture of calm. They saw Voss approach, his aggression palpable, his voice barking accusations without cause. The shove, the kick, the cuffs biting into her wrists played out in stark clarity, the crowd's gasps audible even in the video. Lena's voice, calm and measured, tried to de-escalate, only to be met with Voss's threats. A juror wiped her eyes, another clenched his jaw, the muscles twitching visibly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier as the truth laid itself bare. Patel turned to the jury, her voice steady but searing. This was not a mistake. This was not procedure. This was power abused, a badge wielded as a weapon against an innocent woman, an FBI agent, yes, but above all a citizen. Voss's defense team scrambled, arguing procedural confusion, claiming he acted on training, that he perceived a threat. But their words rang hollow, drowned by the undeniable reality on the screen. Every excuse crumbled under the weight of the videos, the witnesses, the bruises on Lena's skin. Then it was Lena's turn. She rose, her movements deliberate, stepping into the witness stand with a calm that felt like a storm gathering strength. She raised her hand, swore her oath and sat, her hazel eyes scanning the jury, the judge, the room. Patel approached, her tone respectful, knowing Lena needed no coaching. "Agent Harper," she began, "can you describe what happened on the afternoon of your arrest?" Lena's voice was clear, unembellished, a blade cutting through the room. "I was sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park, writing in a notebook. I was approached without cause, interrogated without justification, and assaulted without provocation." Her words were simple, devastating, each one landing like a stone in still water. She recounted the sequence: the demand for ID, the escalation, the physical assault, the humiliation of being cuffed and shoved into a cruiser. "I tried to identify myself as a federal agent," she said, her tone unwavering. "I was interrupted, treated not as a citizen but as an object to be controlled." The defense attorney, a slick man named Gregory Holt, tried to rattle her, his questions sharp, probing. "You didn't immediately comply with Officer Voss's orders, did you?" Lena's gaze didn't flinch. "I complied as soon as his orders were clear." He didn't want compliance. He wanted submission. Holt pressed, suggesting she'd provoked the incident, but Lena's composure was a fortress. "This wasn't about procedure," she said, her voice hardening, her eyes flicking to Voss, who shrank in his seat. "This was about power, a system that teaches men like Officer Voss they can dismiss, demean, and discard someone who looks like me without consequence." The courtroom was silent, the scribbling of reporters pausing, the weight of her words sinking into every corner. Patel stepped forward again. "Are you here today just for yourself, Agent Harper?" Lena's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "No. I'm here for every voice silenced before it could speak, every victim without a badge, without a camera, without a platform. For every life treated as less. A beat passed, then another. And what do you want from this court?" Patel asked. Lena's voice was steel. "Justice. Not just for me, for all of us." When she stepped down, the room held its breath. The silence a collective exhale waiting to happen. Voss took the stand next, his testimony a stumbling mess. He contradicted his earlier statements, claiming he was overwhelmed, confused, that Lena's attitude had escalated the situation. But the videos betrayed him, framed by Firmino threat. No resistance, only arrogance. His voice cracked, his hands trembling, as he tried to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. The jury's faces were stone, their eyes cold, the truth too clear to deny. Closing arguments followed, Patel's words a searing indictment of systemic abuse, Holt's a desperate plea for leniency that fell flat. The jury disappeared into deliberation, the courtroom emptying into a tense limbo. Outside, the crowd grew restless, protesters chanting, reporters updating live feeds. Lena stood in a quiet hallway, her legal team nearby, her phone buzzing with messages of support and one anonymous threat. "You'll regret this." She deleted it, her jaw tight, her focus unbroken. The jury returned faster than expected, their faces grim. The foreman stood, the verdict read aloud. Guilty on all counts: assault, false arrest, civil rights violations. A cry erupted from the back of the courtroom, quickly stifled. Voss's head bowed, his shoulders collapsing, his attorney staring blankly ahead. Outside, the crowd roared as the news broke. Signs thrust higher, some protesters weeping, others standing in stunned silence. Lena closed her eyes, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. This was a victory, but not the end. As the courtroom cleared, chaos erupted outside. A group of Voss's supporters, off-duty officers and their ally, pushed through the crowd, shouting slurs, their faces twisted with rage. Lena stepped onto the courthouse steps, the air thick with tension, cameras swiveling to capture the standoff. A bottle sailed through the air, shattering near her feet, but Lena didn't flinch. She raised a hand, her voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't about hate," she said, her words clear, resonant. "It's about truth. We're not fighting each other, we're fighting a system that's failed us all." Her gaze swept the crowd, landing on a young man in the mob, his fists clenched. "You know this," she said, softer now but piercing. "You've seen it." The man hesitated, his anger faltering, and the crowd's energy shifted, the chants resuming, louder, unified. The mob dispersed, some turning away, others joining the protesters, the line between sides blurring. Lena's words had turned a spark into a flame, a moment of division into a call for unity. But the victory was bittersweet. Her phone buzzed again, another threat. This isn't over. She forwarded it to Marcus Reed, her FBI supervisor, her mind already on the documents from the archives, the names gains, the smuggling ring that loomed larger than Voss. In a quiet moment as the crowd thinned, Javier Torres approached, his mother Sofia at his side. The boy's bruise was fading, his eyes bright with something new, hope. "I saw you on TV," he said, his voice shy but firm. "I want to be like you." Lena knelt, meeting his gaze. "You'll be better," she said, her voice soft, a vow. Sofia squeezed her hand, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Lena nodded, standing, her resolve hardening. The trial was over, but the fight was just beginning. Across town, in a dimly lit bar, the man in the hoodie sat in a corner, his phone glowing with a message. "She's unstoppable." Moved to phase 3. The trial had exposed Voss, but the network he served was still intact, and Lena was their primary target. She'd won in court, but the shadows were gathering, and the next battle would test her like never before. Savannah was a city on fire, not with flames, but with the raw, unyielding energy of a people who had tasted justice and refused to settle for less. The guilty verdict against Derek Voss had torn open wounds long hidden beneath the city's genteel surface, and the streets pulsed with defiance. Outside City Hall, protesters filled every square, their voices a thunderous chorus that drowned out the hum of helicopters circling overhead. Makeshift banners waved in the humid air. "Justice is not optional, protect and serve everyone. Enough is enough." Their messages scrawled in marker, spray paint, and hope. Businesses boarded their windows, not out of fear of violence, but because they knew Savannah was no longer the place it had been a week ago. Something permanent had shifted, and the old guard could feel the ground trembling beneath them. Lena Harper stood at the heart of it all, not by choice but by necessity. She hadn't sought the spotlight, hadn't campaigned to be a symbol, but when the people needed someone who had faced the machine and survived, they turned to her. Her speech after the trial, her unyielding presence on the courthouse steps, had made her a beacon for a city desperate for change. Her phone buzzed incessantly with requests, speaking engagements, media interviews, strategy sessions with civic groups, but Lena refused the parade of handshakes from officials who'd done nothing until forced. Instead, she chose the quieter battles, the ones that mattered most. She met with organizers in community centers, sat on worn plastic chairs in overheated rooms, and listened to the voices of those who'd been fighting long before her name made headlines. Mothers, students, workers, immigrants, all bound by a shared demand for a system that served rather than silenced. Tonight, in a converted warehouse near the riverfront, Lena stood before a crowd too large for the folding chairs crammed into the space. People sat on the concrete floor, leaned against graffiti-streaked walls, their faces upturned, their eyes alight with anger and hope in equal measure. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and possibility, the hum of a generator underscoring the urgency of the moment. Lena's navy jacket was dusted with ash from a protest fire she'd passed earlier, her bruises fading but her resolve burning brighter than ever. "We are not asking for permission anymore," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone, each word a spark igniting the room. "We are demanding accountability." The crowd erupted, feet pounding the floor, hands clapping in a rhythm that shook the walls. Lena outlined the plan she'd crafted with organizers: an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, mandatory body cameras with no discretionary shutoff, automatic outside investigations for use of force complaints, and protections for whistleblowers within the police department. It was a blueprint for change, not a press release to be forgotten in committee meetings, but a promise backed by the weight of a city's will. "This won't be easy," she said, her voice steady, her gaze sweeping the room. "It won't be quick. But it will be real." The applause was deafening, a vow from a community ready to fight. But the moment of unity was fragile, tested by forces determined to snuff it out. As the meeting ended, Lena lingered, speaking with organizers, when a young activist, Maya, rushed in, her face pale. "Trouble outside," she said, her voice urgent. "They're trying to break up the protest." Lena followed her to the warehouse doors, stepping into a scene of chaos. A group of counter-protesters, some in plain clothes, others wearing insignia tied to Voss's supporters, had infiltrated the crowd, shouting slurs, shoving demonstrators. Then a flash of light and a deafening crack, a Molotov cocktail arced through the air, shattering against a parked car, flames licking the asphalt. The crowd screamed, some scattering, others standing their ground. Lena's training kicked in, her eyes scanning for threats as she grabbed a fire extinguisher from the warehouse wall. "Stay calm," she shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. She sprayed the flames, dousing the fire as organizers rallied the crowd, forming a human chain to protect the vulnerable. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but Lena knew better than to trust their arrival. She spotted a figure in a hoodie at the edge of the chaos, his face obscured, slipping away as the flames died. It was him, the man from the park, the shadow haunting her every move. The police arrived, their lights flashing, but their presence only heightened the tension. Officers in riot gear pushed through, their batons raised, their faces blank. Lena stepped forward, her badge in hand, her voice a command. "Back off," she said, her eyes locking onto the lead officer. "This is a peaceful protest. You escalate, you answer to me." The officer hesitated, his gaze flickering to her badge, then to the crowd, which had begun chanting again. "No more. No more." The standoff held for a tense moment before the officer signaled his team to stand down, the crowd's unity a shield stronger than their armor. As the police retreated, Lena turned to Maya, her voice low. "Get everyone inside. Keep them safe." Maya nodded, her eyes fierce, and Lena slipped into the shadows, following the path the hooded man had taken. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that slicked the pavement, masking her footsteps. She tracked him to an alley, his silhouette pausing under a flickering streetlight. Her hand rested on her Glock, but she didn't draw, her instincts warning her to observe, not engage. The man pulled out a phone, his voice a low murmur she couldn't catch, then vanished around a corner. Lena memorized the spot, her mind filing it away for later. Back at her apartment, the weight of the night settled on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed with another threat, this time a photo of her at the warehouse, taken from a distance, her face circled in red. "You can't save them all." She forwarded it to Marcus Reed, her FBI supervisor, her jaw tight. The documents from the archives, Clara's envelope, Ethan's folder, they all pointed to a network led by Captain Harold Gaines, a man whose name appeared on every buried complaint, every dismissed case. The Molotov attack, the hooded man, the threats, they were his moves, a desperate bid to stop her before she could expose him. Lena sat at her table, her notebook open, her pen scratching out a plan. She needed more evidence, a direct link to Gaines, something undeniable. Ethan's warning about the archives being cleaned haunted her. She was running out of time. A knock at the door startled her, her hand reaching for her weapon. Through the peephole, she saw Sofia Torres, Javier's mother, her face drawn with worry. Lena opened the door, her voice soft. "Sofia, what's wrong?" "They came to our house," Sofia said, her voice trembling. "Men in a black car, asking about Javier, saying he's in trouble again. I told them to leave, but they left this." She handed Lena a note, the words scrawled in jagged ink. "Tell Harper to back off, or the kid pays." Lena's blood ran cold, her resolve hardening. Stay with me tonight, she said, guiding Sophia inside. You and Javier are safe here. Sophia nodded, tears in her eyes, but Lena's mind was already elsewhere, plotting her next move. She called Marcus, her voice urgent. I need surveillance on a Captain Harold Gaines. And protection for Sophia and Javier Torres. Marcus hesitated, then agreed. You're playing with fire, Lena. She didn't flinch. Let it burn. As Sophia settled on the couch, Lena returned to her notebook, writing a single line, they think fear will stop us. They're wrong. Outside, the protests grew louder, a chorus of voices refusing to be silenced. But in the shadows, Gaines's network was tightening its grip, and the hooded man was moving again, his phone buzzing with orders. End her. Now. Lena knew the threats were escalating, but so was her fight. The community she'd rallied organizers, protesters, even Javier was her army, their courage a fire that no Molotov could extinguish. She slipped on her jacket, brushing ash from the sleeves, and stepped into the night. The city was watching, and Lena Harper was ready to lead, no matter the cost. The Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., loomed like a fortress of marble and glass, its austere columns cutting sharp lines against a sky bruised with clouds. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and the weight of decisions that shaped millions of lives. Lena Harper moved through the main hall with measured purpose, her visitor badge clipped to her lapel, her heels echoing softly on the tiled floor. A young aide led her past portraits of former attorneys general, their stern gazes frozen in time, and bronze plaques commemorating legal battles fought long before her own. The corridors were a labyrinth of security checkpoints and hushed conversations, a place where every step carried consequence. Lena's navy blazer masked the fading bruises on her wrists, but nothing could hide the fire in her hazel Aisa fire forged in Savannah's streets, tempered by a trial, and fueled by a city's cry for justice. The aide ushered her into a windowless conference room deep within the building, its oval table surrounded by half a dozen officials, their faces a blend of authority and calculation. Deputy Attorney General Claire Vance sat at the head, a woman in her 50s with a sharp mind and sharper instincts, her dark suit as immaculate as her reputation. Beside her was Thomas Greer, head of the Civil Rights Division, his tie loosened, his expression one of cautious respect. Two senior advisors, their names familiar from headlines, flanked the table, their notepads open but untouched. They rose as Lena entered, a subtle but unmistakable gesture. Agent Harper, Vance said, extending a hand, her voice warm but precise. Thank you for coming. Lena shook her hand, her grip firm, her face neutral. Deputy Attorney General, she replied, her tone clipped, professional. Vance gestured to a chair. Please sit. Lena did, folding her hands in front of her, her posture unyielding. She knew the weight of this moment, knew she wasn't here as a witness or a survivor but as a force that had shifted the national conversation. The protests in Savannah, the trial of Derek Voss, the documents exposing Captain Harold Gaines's network thief made her a figure too large for even Washington to ignore. Vance leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Lena's. You've changed the narrative, she said, her voice carrying the weight of truth. Not just in Savannah but nationwide. You've exposed systemic failures we can no longer sidestep. Lena remained silent, her training keeping her guarded, her instincts warning her to listen before speaking. Greer pushed a leather-bound folder across the table, its cover embossed with the DOJ seal. We're establishing a new oversight body, he said, his tone deliberate. A National Civil Rights Monitoring Task Force independent, with federal authority to investigate local and state agencies when patterns of abuse are identified. We want you to lead it. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the room. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Lena opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. Proposed structures, chain of command, preliminary funding. It was real, not a gesture or a headline, but a genuine offer to build something unprecedented. Vance elaborated, her voice steady. You'd have full discretion to assemble your team, direct access to federal complaint databases, authority to issue public reports without pre-clearance. Lena closed the folder slowly, her fingers lingering on the leather. You're offering me the keys to a storm, she said, her voice low, her gaze meeting Vance's. Vance's mouth twitched into a faint smile. We're offering you the means to finish what you started. Greer leaned forward, his tone candid. You'll have enemies, police unions, politicians, even some within our ranks. They'll fight you, discredit you, try to bury your work before it sees daylight. Vance picked up where he left off, her voice firm. We can shield you to a point, But the integrity of this task force will depend on your ability to withstand the pressure. Lena tapped her fingers lightly on the table, her mind racing. The offer was a blade-sharp, powerful but double-edged. She recognized the politics at play. They needed someone the public trusted, someone who'd walked through fire and emerged unbroken. But the opportunity was real, a chance to dismantle the systems that had cuffed her, bruised her and silenced countless others. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room's sterile air. Greer didn't hesitate. "You'll be a target. Not just in Savannah but everywhere. Every investigation you launch, every report you publish will make you a lightning rod." Vance nodded, her eyes narrowing. "If you say no, someone else will lead it. But you know the stakes better than anyone, and frankly, we believe you're the only one with the credibility to make this survive its first year." Lena stared at the folder, her thoughts spiraling. She saw Savannah's streets, lit with protest fires, Javier Torres's bruised face, the names buried in the archives gains, Voss, a network of corruption that stretched beyond one city. She thought of the threats piling up on her phone, the hooded man in the shadows, the black SUV that had tried to run her down. She thought of the night spent alone, wondering if change was even possible. Closing her eyes for a moment, she let the weight settle, then opened them, meeting Vance's gaze without flinching. "I'll consider it," she said, her voice steady, resolute. Vance nodded as if expecting the answer. "You have 72 hours. After that, we announce the task force, with or without you." Lena stood, tucking the folder under her arm, the decision a heavy knot in her chest. As she exited, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the muted pulse of a building built to weather storms. Outside, the DC streets glistened with recent rain, the monuments glowing in the evening light. Lena walked slowly, her steps sure, the folder a tangible weight against her side. She'd fought so long to be heard, now they wanted her to speak for millions. But the offer came with shadows. As she reached her hotel, her phone buzzed a new threat, this time a voice message, distorted but chilling. "Take the job, and you'll never see Savannah again." Lena saved it, forwarding it to Marcus Reed, her FBI supervisor, her jaw tight. The message wasn't random. Someone knew about the DOJ offer, someone with access, power gains, or someone higher. She entered her room, locking the door and spread the folder's contents across the desk. The task force was a weapon, but wielding it meant stepping into a war she might not survive. A knock at the door startled her. She checked the peephole, seeing Maya, the young activist from Savannah, her face tense. Lena opened the door, her voice low. "What are you doing here?" Maya stepped inside, her hands trembling as she pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "I flew up after you left. People back home are scared. They're saying Gaines is moving evidence covering his tracks. This came from a source in the precinct, more files, stuff they didn't get to shred." Lena took the drive, her mind racing. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone firm but kind. "It's too dangerous." Maya's eyes flashed. "You're not the only one fighting, Lena. We're in this together." Lena nodded, a flicker of pride cutting through her caution. She plugged the drive into her secure laptop, the screen filling with scanned documents, financial records, emails, proof of payoffs linking Gaines to the smuggling ring. One email, sent from an encrypted account, mentioned her by name. "Harper's getting too close. Neutralize her." Lena's pulse quickened, but her hands stayed steady. "Thank you," she said to Maya, her voice soft. "Now go home. Stay safe." Maya hesitated, then nodded, slipping out into the night. Alone again, Lena sat back, the folder and USB drive before her, twin beacons in a gathering storm. The DOJ offer was a chance to change the game, but it came with a cost: enemies in the shadows, lives at stake, her own included. She thought of Javier, Sofia, the protesters, the girl with the sign, "We see you, Lena." They weren't just fighting for her, they were fighting for themselves, for a future where justice wasn't a privilege. Lena picked up her pen, writing in her notebook, "If I lead for them. No compromises." The decision was hers, but the fight belonged to everyone. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the battle lines being drawn. In Savannah, the hooded man moved through the shadows, his phone buzzing with orders. "She's in DC, make it quick." Lena Harper was on the cusp of power, but the forces against her were closing in, and the next move would test her like never before. The Georgia sky stretched wide and heavy over Forsyth Park, its colors softening as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of amber and indigo. The air was thick with the scent of fresh grass and the distant murmur of the Savannah River, a quiet hymn to a city that had become both battleground and sanctuary. Lena Harper walked alone down the familiar gravel path, her steps slow, deliberate, each footfall a tether to the moment that had changed everything. Her navy blazer was unbuttoned, her hair loose for the first time in weeks, a few strands catching the breeze. The weight of the past month's Vasa's trial, the protests, the threats, the DOJ offer pressed against her, but here, in this fragile pocket of peace, she let herself breathe. The pond lay ahead, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the sky's fading light. A pair of ducks glided across it, their ripples soft, unhurried, a reminder that life moved forward, indifferent to the storms it left behind. The old bench stood where it always had, its paint peeling, its wood splintered, a humble relic that bore no trace of the violence it had witnessed. To the world it was just a bench tucked between towering oaks and whispering reeds, but to Lena it was sacred ground, a place where she'd been broken and reborn, where a single act of defiance had sparked a movement that still burned through Savannah's streets. She brushed the dust from the seat and sat, the roughness of the wood grounding her through the fabric of her slacks. Her battered notebook rested in her lap, its pages creased, its edges worn from weeks of relentless use. She opened it, flipping past lists of reforms, transcripts of meetings, notes from late-night strategy sessions, past the anger and exhaustion that had fueled her fight. She stopped on a fresh page, her pen hovering, then wrote a single line. From silence we built beacons. The words settled into the paper, firm, final, a vow carved into the future. Lena stared at them, feeling their weight, their promise, her heart steady even as the world around her churned. The park was quieter now than it had been that fateful day, the families gone, the children's laughter a distant echo. Yet it felt alive, humming with the ghosts of those who'd stood with her, protesters with their signs, Javier with his tentative hope, Sophia with her fierce love. Lena leaned back, her eyes tracing the pond's edge, her mind drifting to the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the cuffs, the cold steel biting her wrists, Vasa's sneer, the weight of a system that had tried to erase her. She remembered the crowd outside Substation 3, their chance a lifeline, and the trial where truth had cut through lies like a blade. She remembered the documents, the threats, the hooded man who still haunted her steps, a reminder that the fight was far from over. A soft voice broke her reverie. "Agent Harper?" Lena turned, seeing Javier Torres approaching, his sneakers scuffing the gravel, his mother Sophia at his side. The boy's bruise had faded, his eyes brighter now, carrying a spark of purpose that hadn't been there in the precinct cell. Beside him stood a group of children, no older than 12, their faces a mix of awe and determination, clutching handmade signs, "Be the change, justice for all." Javier stepped forward, his voice shy but steady. "We saw you on the news. We started a club. Justice for all. We want to help people like you did for me." Lena's throat tightened, a rare warmth spreading through her chest. She knelt, meeting Javier's gaze, her voice soft but firm. "You're already helping," she said, her eyes flicking to the children. Their signs a testament to a future she was fighting for. "You're the ones who'll make this last." Javier's face broke into a smile, small but radiant, and Sophia squeezed Lena's arm, her eyes glistening. "You gave us hope," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "You gave him a chance to dream again." Lena stood, her gaze sweeping the group, her heart swelling with the pride she hadn't expected. "Keep dreaming," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. "And keep fighting. You're not alone." The children nodded, their faces fierce, and as they turned to leave, Javier lingered, holding out a folded piece of paper. "For you," he said, then ran to catch up with his mother. Lena unfolded it, finding a child's drawing, a woman in a blazer, standing tall, surrounded by people holding hands, the words "Thank you," Lena scrawled in crayon. She pressed it to her chest, her eyes stinging, the notebook in her lap suddenly heavier with purpose. She sat again, the bench creaking beneath her, and opened her notebook to a new page. Her pen moved swiftly, sketching a blueprint not just for Savannah, but for every city daring to hope. A national framework for accountability, civilian oversight boards, whistleblower protections, transparent investigations, all rooted in the truth that justice wasn't a privilege but a right. She wrote of training programs to rebuild trust, community-led coalitions to hold power accountable, policies that couldn't be erased by politics or time. The words flowed, her vision taking shape, a legacy for Javier, for the girl with the sign, for every voice that had been silenced. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the park. Passers-by glanced her way, some with recognition, others with curiosity, but none approached. The bench had become a quiet monument, a place where something broken had begun to heal. Lena lost track of time, her pen scratching until the light faded, the park emptying into dusk. When she finished, she closed the notebook gently, holding it against her chest, its weight a reminder of the lives it carried. She remembered sitting here before, small, targeted, alone. But she wasn't alone anymore. The ripples she'd set in motion had become waves, the cries for justice no longer whispers but thunder rolling across the nation. Lena stood, running her hand lightly across the bench, a silent vow etched in the touch. This place would not be remembered for the violence done to her, but for what rose after a movement, a reckoning, a light. She slipped the notebook into her bag and began to walk away, her steps firm, her back straight. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The park would remain, the bench would endure, and someday, someone else would sit here, feeling lost, feeling small, and know they weren't because Lena had sat here first, and she'd written a new beginning. As she reached the main road, a group of teenagers marched past, their handmade signs held high, their faces bright with stubborn hope. One girl, no older than 16, caught Lena's eye and raised her sign higher, "Be the change." Lena smiled, a rare, genuine curve of her lips, her heart lifting. Where they tried to silence her, 1,000 voices now carried forward. Where they tried to erase her, 1,000 footsteps thundered in her place. The city was no longer waiting for permission to change, it was happening, and it wouldn't stop. Her phone buzzed, a secure message from Marcus Reed, DOJ's waiting. "Your call." Lena paused, the folder from DC still in her bag, its weight a promise and a challenge. She decided in the quiet of the park, her resolve forged anew. She'd lead the National Civil Rights Monitoring Task Force, not for power, but for the people who'd stood with her, for the children who'd drawn her face in crayon, for the future they deserved. But before she could step into that role, there was one last battle in Savannah. A shadow moved at the edge of the park, the hooded man from her nightmares, his phone glowing as he typed a message. Lena's eyes narrowed, her hand brushing her holstered Glock. She didn't approach, but she memorized his stance, his gait, filing it away for the confrontation she knew was coming. Captain Harold Gaines's network was still out there, its tendrils deep, its threats real. The black SUV, the Molotov cocktail, the note left at Sophia's house, they were all his, and he was watching her now, waiting for her to falter. Lena turned toward her car, the city skyline catching the last light of day, its buildings glowing like something freshly forged. She slid into the driver's seat, the engine humming to life, and pulled onto the road. Her phone buzzed again, a call from Maya, the activist. "Lena, we've got new evidence recordings of Gaines talking payoffs. We're ready to go public." Lena's jaw tightened, a spark of triumph cutting through her caution. "Send it to me," she said. "And stay safe." She hung up, her eyes fixed on the road, the notebook on the passenger seat a testament to her fight. The plane to DC awaited, but Savannah wasn't done with her yet. Lena drove toward a meeting with organizers, her mind already mapping the takedown of Gaines's network. The community she'd rallied, Javier, Sophia, Maya, Ethan, was her strength, their courage a fire that burned brighter than any threat. As she passed City Hall, protesters still gathered, their chants a heartbeat. No more. No more. Lena pressed her hand against the window, feeling the weight of every name, every face, every fight yet to come. She'd sat on that bench a victim, but she'd risen a leader, and where they tried to drown her, she'd build a lighthouse for those who came after. And there you have it, folks, Lena Harper's epic saga. From a quiet bench in Savannah to shaking the foundations of injustice like a human earthquake. If this story feels like it's ripped from today's headlines, that's because it is. In 2025, we're still wrestling with systems that sometimes protect the wrong people and silence the right ones. Lena's fight reminds us that change doesn't start with a cape or a corner office. It starts with one voice refusing to stay quiet. Even when the world screams, "Sit down." So let's be real. We've all got a bench somewhere in our lives. A moment where we can choose to stand up or stay seated. Maybe it's calling out that shady coworker who borrows your lunch, looking at you, Gary. Or maybe it's speaking up when you see something wrong in your community. Either way, Lena's got us beat. She took on a whole corrupt network while we're still debating whether to send that strongly worded email.